Hi everyone, in today's episode of Ask David, I'm going to answer a question about f-stops. Hey David, my photography teacher keeps throwing a term around that I don't know, f-stop. I should know this, but I don't really understand what an f-stop is. What is an f-stop? Good question. Photography has its own set of words and jargon that are time-consuming and difficult to learn until you've really gotten to speak them a lot. An f-stop is one of those. And one of the reasons f-stop is a confusing term is because f-stops apply to your aperture, and they also apply to your ISO and your shutter speed. So an f-stop is basically just a unit of measurement of light. And every f-stop represents a doubling of the f-stop before. So let's take a look at what that means with your aperture. So let's say you have a 50mm f2 lens on the front of your camera. That's a pretty common 50mm lens. Wide open, which means the aperture is completely open, you can't see any of the blades, would be called f2. That's calculated by saying a 50mm lens at f2, the circle, the clear space in the lens is 25mm. Your aperture opening at f2 is 25mm. The next step up from this is f2.8. So if you take the lens off your camera and you set it to f2.8, most camera lenses, there's a few exceptions, will stop down and you can see the aperture, and it will look something about like this, where the aperture has started to close very slightly. f2 to f2.8 represents half the light coming through the lens as previously. After this comes f4, 5.68. Every time you go up, you cut the light in half. So that means f4, so from f2 to f2.8, half the light. f2.8 to f4, half the light. f4 is 25% of the light of f2. So an f-stop is a relational unit of measure. It's not saying f2 lets through X number of photons, f2.8 lets through half that. It's a relationship-based unit of measure, like decibels. Now, in that same vein, shutter speeds are also measured in f-stop, 1/1000th to 1/500th to 1/250th. Each of those marks is an f-stop. 1/750th of a second to 1/375th is an f-stop. Anytime you cut the number in half or double the number, you've increased one f-stop. 1 second exposure to 2 seconds of exposure is an f-stop. It's a doubling of the amount of light that comes through. With ISO, it's the same. An f-stop change in sensitivity, or your ISO, from 100 to 200, to 200 to 400, when you go from one of those to the next, from 100 to 200, half the amount of light is being let into the camera based on your light meter settings. If you go from 400 to 200, twice the amount of light is being let into the camera based on your light meter settings, and how that affects your shutter speed and aperture meter readings. So the f-stop is relational. Every time you increase one f-stop or decrease one f-stop, you have either doubled or halved the amount of light that's reaching the film.